Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Wellbe podcast. This podcast is designed to help you learn, expand what you thought was possible, and become as empowered as you can be in your health. Thanks for tuning back in for the 7th season of the Wellbe podcast. I hope you've been enjoying our last few interviews, investigative guides, and our latest Wellbe wrap-up so far this season. Today's episode is an in-depth guide to elimination diets. Why have we dedicated a whole guide and episode to those? Well, I've interviewed a lot of functional and integrative medicine doctors, and everyone has the same answer. Elimination diets are the gold standard for figuring out food sensitivities and intolerances. They are way more effective and cheaper than any food sensitivity test out there or allergy test out there. And food either heals or hurts your gut, and therefore your hormones, your immune system, your brain, your mood. You get the picture. Everything in your body is affected by the food you eat, and more importantly, by how you digest that food. Real quick before we jump in, unless you're driving, of course, then don't do this. But otherwise, if you're holding your phone right now and haven't yet left the Wellbe podcast a review, please do it right now. It takes less than a minute, and if you're getting anything out of the Wellbe podcast, this is your way to tell me. Thank you for writing that review if you just paused this and wrote one, and thank you for listening to the Wellbe podcast. Now let's dive in on how to successfully do an elimination diet and why to do one to begin with. First of all, if you've got any chronic symptoms or even a full-blown chronic condition, chances are your body is not digesting some kind of food you're eating, and it's creating inflammation and some kind of reaction or response in your body. Now, we all eat a huge variety of different foods each day, or we should be, so figuring out the source of your symptoms can be tricky. Enter elimination diets. By some estimates, 20% of people have some sort of food sensitivity or intolerance, though of course, not all of them or most of them know that. A food sensitivity or intolerance might cause digestive issues like bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, and nausea, and skin issues like rashes, itching, or hives. Also, it can cause headaches, fatigue, and even trouble concentrating or brain fog-like symptoms. Because the symptoms of a food sensitivity vary so widely and are often similar to symptoms of other conditions, these warning signs can be easily missed. But if you're willing to do one, an elimination diet is really the gold standard for unearthing a food sensitivity or sensitivities or intolerances, and you might even find that something you attributed to, poor sleep or something in your home might actually be because of a food you were eating. So let's get into the testing. You may have heard of IgG food sensitivity tests, which look for food sensitivities through blood samples. And it's tempting to reach for a quick fix rather than going through the effort of an elimination diet. However, these tests are not only quite pricey, but also unproven. In fact, the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, and the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology have all issued position statements against their use. That leaves us with elimination diets, which work by removing foods from your diet that you suspect you might have a food sensitivity to. Then, after several weeks of elimination, you reintroduce the foods one at a time that you removed, tracking your symptoms along the way so that you can identify anything you don't tolerate well. Once you've identified any trigger foods, you cut them out of your diet permanently. When you consume a food that your body doesn't tolerate well, it triggers inflammation in your gut and your immune system. Elimination diets work because they remove the trigger, allowing inflammation to slowly go down and restoring normal function in your body. When you begin reintroducing the foods, then you'll be able to clearly notice if any old symptoms flare up. The logic behind them is straightforward and it works. In one symptom, people with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome who followed an elimination diet had up to a 26% greater reduction in symptoms than those who did not. Other studies have found that an elimination diet may reduce symptoms of ADHD, eczema, and migraines. And for those without specific diagnoses like these, elimination diets can bring some clarity to seemingly mysterious issues like poor digestion, fatigue, and other skin problems. Now, there are a ton of different types that you can choose from. Some are geared around specific conditions, for instance, IBS or autoimmune disease. Some are trendy challenges like Whole30, and others simply provide a loose structure for finding a food sensitivity, whatever it might be. First, you've got low FODMAP. This elimination diet plan is great for people with IBS and SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It involves removing FODMAPs, which are short-chain carbohydrates that some people can't digest. What's tricky about FODMAPs is that there aren't any real rules or logic to help you know what falls into that category. For instance, asparagus is a FODMAP, but green beans aren't. Cherries are a FODMAP, but grapes aren't. Cashews are a FODMAP, but walnuts aren't, and so on and so on. So this one's hard, and there's a very specific list of foods you can and cannot eat. Then we have the autoimmune protocol, known as the AIP diet. It's designed to reduce inflammation caused by autoimmune disease. While on this diet, you eliminate grains, legumes, eggs, dairy, nightshade, vegetables, and processed foods, among other items. It can help with autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and so on. Then you've got Whole30. Whole30 is an approach to eating that you're probably used to hearing about around New Year's, when everybody is sharing their resolutions to jumpstart January and eat healthier. As the name implies, it's a 30-day plan in which you eliminate many of the same foods you eliminate with AIP, as well as alcohol. The GAPS diet stands for Gut and Psychology Syndrome, and it is an elimination diet aimed at treating conditions that affect the brain, like autism. It involves eliminating sugar and artificial sweeteners, alcohol, processed foods, grains, dairy, caffeine, and soy, among other items. This is, of course, aimed at people who are suffering from gut issues as well as mental health issues, neurological issues, mood disorders, etc. Next, we've got the just one food elimination diet. This type of elimination diet involves eliminating just one food, exactly how it sounds, or just one food group, for example. You could do a dairy elimination diet or a gluten elimination diet. This is the easiest way to do elimination diet as it's the least restrictive. However, if you have more than one food sensitivity, and many of us have no idea if we have 1 or 5 or 3 before we do one of these, this approach might not be best because it's going to take you the same amount of time to figure out if you have a gluten sensitivity as it would to eliminate maybe a handful of foods and find out that you have a gluten and dairy and corn sensitivity, or you get what I mean. Next, we have the different foods over a period of time option. This is a much longer elimination diet than most others as it involves 4 different phases of roughly 30 days each. So that's 4 months. During each phase, you eliminate a few different foods or food groups. By the end of all 4 phases, you'll have gone through such a thorough elimination diet that you'll have covered every possible thing that could be a sensitivity or an intolerance. But you'll never feel extremely restricted because you were only eliminating a few foods at a time. It's a bit complicated, so we have a template actually linked in the written version of this episode on getwellbe.com for this particular elimination diet, so head to the article to check it out. Last but not least, we have the few foods elimination diet, which is a simplified, restrictive type of elimination diet in which you eat only a select list of foods, usually foods that you don't commonly eat. This diet is very restrictive, so it should only be followed for a short amount of time. We'll be right back after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the Wellbe community, so head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about my private, holistic patient advocacy work, my programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. Find me at getwellbe and be sure to press follow. Next, you need to know how long it's going to take. An elimination diet, like I just said, is not a lifestyle. It's a tool that you can use to unearth a food sensitivity or intolerance, and then you can adjust your lifestyle going forward accordingly. An elimination diet by nature is quite restrictive, and following one for a prolonged period of time could cause nutrient deficiencies or just frustration. That said, it's important to eliminate any potential trigger foods for at least 3 weeks. That's right, 3 full weeks. This is important because when your immune system reacts negatively to a food, it creates antibodies. And these antibodies take around 21 days to clear out of your system. If you do an elimination diet for a shorter period of time than 3 weeks, your body won't be able to get back to baseline, making it impossible to identify a food sensitivity or intolerance as you start reintroducing eliminated items. Now, each elimination diet has different phases. There's actually 3 phases. So the first one is planning. In the planning phase, you decide what foods you'll be eliminating, or if you're going to follow a specific diet plan like AIP or Whole30. Remember that most restrictive plans are the most likely to unearth an unknown sensitivity, but they're also the most difficult to follow. So I would really think about the severity of your symptoms or the number of different symptoms that you just kind of live with all the time. Things like skin issues or any digestive issues or fatigue or, feelings of depression or any of that. I'd actually write all the things that you kind of experience in a routine way down. And then think about how many foods you'd like to eliminate to see what might be causing what, if anything. Next is, of course, the elimination period. So this is the longest phase. This is the one I was just talking about that's 21 days at least. If you slip up, even a small slip up, your body will go back to square one and you'll need to start over. So total compliance is very important. During this phase, you should keep a detailed journal of what you're eating, how you're feeling, and what symptoms you're experiencing. It's great to keep everything in one place. So I'd write down symptoms you're experiencing before you start, then any symptoms you're experiencing during the elimination period, then symptoms you're experiencing during the reintroduction period. Now, you can even talk about things like your mood or your stress level or frustration, how much sleep you're getting, how your digestion is, if you pooped that day, etc. You can, of course, use an old-fashioned journal and pen or a symptom tracking app. And we have some different symptom tracking apps on getwellbe.com that are maybe going to be helpful for this. The last phase is the reintroduction phase after the 3 weeks of elimination. Each food or food group should be introduced individually over the course of 2 to 3 days. So what this means is, let's say you eliminated corn, soy, and dairy. The first day of reintroduction, you would, let's say, have dairy at multiple meals, meaning more than just one, so maybe 2 or even 3 meals over 2 to 3 days. So if your reintroduction starts on a Thursday, you would do it on a Thursday and Friday, that is eating dairy at least 2 meals. And perhaps on Saturday, you then reintroduce corn, and you eat corn at least 2 meals on Saturday and Sunday, and you get the idea. So depending on how many things you eliminate, this reintroduction phase can take just a few days or maybe even 2 weeks or something in the middle. This is really important because you have to be very clear on which food you are reacting to if you do have a reaction. So using the same example, if you eat dairy and you find that you have a reaction, but you also reintroduce corn the same day, you wouldn't know if you were reacting to the corn or the dairy or both. So it's great to make it very clear as to what you are reacting to. Unfortunately, if you did introduce 2 things in the same day and have a reaction, you might have to do the whole elimination phase over again to find out which one you were having a reaction to. On the other hand, if you experience no symptoms during those 2 to 3 days of reintroducing dairy, let's say, then you can cross dairy off your list of potential food sensitivities or intolerances and move on to the next one. If you do experience symptoms, then you've successfully identified a food sensitivity. Now, with something that's more of a food category like dairy, it's best to mix it up as to the types of dairy. So not just milk and yogurt in the same day, or over 2 days, you might have milk and cheese and yogurt, but also mix up cow dairy, sheep dairy, goat dairy, things like that. So you can be really clear, okay, am I reacting to all kinds of dairy? Or if you were just having milk, maybe milk's the only issue. So you want to really have a wide variety of dairy. Now, if you do identify some symptoms or reaction to dairy, then congratulations. Now you've identified that you have some kind of intolerance or sensitivity to dairy, but you need to continue individually reintroducing the other foods or food groups that you gave up and tracking your symptoms to see if other symptoms appear that might be a reaction to soy or corn, for example. Now, let's talk about some coping strategies because elimination diets are very hard. Make sure you keep your blood sugar stable. When your blood sugar dips and spikes, you'll experience hunger and cravings, making it more difficult to stick to your meal plan. Make sure to eat a filling combination of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates at every meal and for any snacks to regulate your blood sugar. Next, tone down your social schedule. Before you begin, make sure you don't have any can't move social engagements during this time. For instance, a fancy dinner at a restaurant or a wedding where you know you'll want to have a glass of wine or maybe enjoy a piece of birthday cake. Once your calendar is free and clear, be careful about overcommitting and putting yourself in situations where it might be difficult to stay compliant. This might mean being a bit of a hermit or bringing your own food to social gatherings or planning activities that don't involve eating, like a walk with a friend. The same would be true, I think, for traveling because it's sometimes very hard to find what you need to eat in airports or when you're on the go. So just be conscious of what you'll be doing over the 4 to 5 weeks total, usually, of doing this elimination diet. Now, the most restricting elimination diets are the ones that are most likely to help you identify food sensitivities, which I explained. But that said, every person is different, not only in terms of their symptoms, but also their lifestyles and unique nutritional needs. Because of that, there's no one size fits all. Use the information I just gave you as loose guidelines for figuring out what works best for you. So as I said, keep a food journal, write down everything you eat during this time, as well as any symptoms you experience throughout the day. This might help you identify patterns or potential trigger foods. Next, get honest with yourself. Ask yourself important questions such as, what foods do you tend to crave? Cravings are not a good thing. Usually they're the bad bugs in your body that are asking for it, like, sugar, which is why a lot of us have sugar cravings. What foods do you eat most often? Which foods would you have trouble giving up? Unfortunately, the foods that hold the most power over you are sometimes the ones that you need to get rid of the most. Next, try the common culprits. While you could have a food sensitivity to anything, some foods are more commonly associated with allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities. These foods are often excluded and are a good place to start. So I mentioned dairy, but certainly gluten, dairy, soy, eggs, corn, and nightshade vegetables, which include things like eggplant and tomatoes, are the most common. Now, if you're following a specific diet plan like Whole30 or AIP, you'll be able to easily find the plan online, complete with meal plans and recipes. But if you're going to freestyle it a bit more, here are some guidelines for doing a basic one. So if you're making it up on your own, it makes sense to eliminate the most common allergens: gluten, soy, dairy, eggs, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, corn, alcohol, caffeine, processed foods, sugar, and artificial sweetener. Now, this is very restrictive, and you might be thinking, what on earth left do I want to eat? There are lots of amazing foods to eat, mostly plants, certainly lots of great sources of grass-fed meat or, fruits and vegetables. But yes, this takes away many things. And you're thinking, why do I need to take away alcohol and caffeine to determine whether I have a food sensitivity? Great question. Because these are toxins and therefore cause inflammation in your body, you want to take out things that are going to cause inflammation during these 3 weeks so that your whole immune system and your immune response calms down. Only when it's calm can you then see if you are going to trigger a reaction when reintroducing food. So that's the reason I'm not just torturing you to tell you you should just not drink alcohol or caffeine for 3 weeks, but it's all about inflammation. Now, before you get started with the elimination period, write down several breakfasts, lunches, dinners, and snacks that you like that have none of the no foods I just mentioned, and then make a grocery list of items from there of things that you don't have or need more of so that you're well prepared and you don't have a moment where you're just staring in the pantry or in the fridge thinking, I have nothing to eat, and you reach for something that might be contaminated without your realizing it because there's a hidden form of soy, for example, or corn in the ingredient list, or for something that you know violates it, and then you'd have to start up all over again. Truly, nothing tanks an elimination diet test better than feeling like you have nothing to eat, getting hungry, and then grabbing those gluten or sugar-filled cookies or corn chips in your pantry. Once you've completed the 3 full weeks of elimination, introduce those eliminated foods one by one, and remember to allow the 2 or 3 days and eat the food being reintroduced at nearly every meal during those 2 to 3 days to make sure you're going to have a reaction if you are in fact sensitive. Then look for any symptoms or changes in how you feel. So that's it for this episode. If you think you may need to do an elimination diet and want to see everything I just laid out, head to getwellbe.com and check out the written version of this episode. There's also a link in the show notes, and it's complete with links to the various things that I mentioned, including elimination diet templates. And if you're thinking this just sounds way too overwhelming and you don't want to do it, believe me, I agree. But I also know from so many experts and so much research that food intolerances and sensitivities are the root cause of more chronic symptoms than you could possibly imagine. So rather than going on a drug or another drug or having a procedure or just living in misery with digestive issues or brain issues or mood issues or physical issues like itching or pain indefinitely, try this once so that you can see if it's just corn, for example, that you can avoid that as best you can and live a symptom-free life. How great does that sound? Now, if you head to GetWellbe to check out the written article that I just mentioned, become a WellBe Insider so you can get all of our latest content, special offers, and personal notes I don't share anywhere else weekly in your inbox. Plus, you'll get a free copy of my audio guide, How to Feel the Best You've Ever Felt and Heal Anything. The 10 things you need to optimize your health and heal any health issue, big or small, naturally. Even if you're the healthiest person out there, I promise you'll learn something you didn't know that can optimize your health. If you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please share this episode with family or friends who you think might find it valuable and informative. It means a lot and helps more people find the podcast. If you already have, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the WellBe Podcast.